You're listening to Discutafel, the podcast on eco-friendly gardening and permaculture. Welcome to episode 82 of Discutafel, which has been released on July 16th, 2020. Discutafel is green audio, a podcast based in the Netherlands on eco-friendly gardening and other sustainable topics. My name is Ivonne and I am your host. Every 6 weeks we make an episode in English and every second week in Dutch. And we make those episodes in English to reach you, green-minded people around the whole world who don't speak Dutch. Now, for today's subject, just the other week I read a few English tweets about growing potatoes for Christmas. This seems to be a tradition in the UK, but it's not a tradition here in the Netherlands, not at all. But still, I thought it might be a nice idea to share some of my very young, very little experiences in growing organic potatoes. You probably know a lot more about the subject, and I would welcome your ideas. Please share them by Twitter or by email. On our website, Discutafel.nl, you'll find our contact details. So, listen to my own humble experiences. Discu Journal. It has been the second year now that I've been growing a few organic potatoes in the garden. And as you may know, potatoes need to be earthened up. When they are about 10 centimeters tall, the shoots can be mounded around with soil to their full height. Just leave a little bit of green leaves visible. And this process is known as earthing up. Earthing up potatoes stimulates the growth of underground stems, and those underground stems will bear the potatoes. But it also gives you some frost protection, and very important, it prevents potatoes going green because the light doesn't penetrate, and you can't eat green potatoes. They are poisonous. So you should keep the light away from the potatoes. This earthing up can be repeated once or twice more every 2 or 3 weeks, I think. First time I grew potatoes was last year, 2019, and I grew them in old compost bags. I took the inside out, so the black inside was on the outside of the bag, of the sack, just to keep the light excluded, and I put some holes in the bag on the side and on the bottom for the drainage. When growing potatoes in sacks or in large pots or containers, you can plant these potatoes in about 10 centimeters of compost at the base of the bag. And when you plant your potatoes in vegetable beds, you might consider to plant them deeper. Earthing up is perhaps not necessary when you plant those potatoes deeper, as long as the light is excluded, as I explained just before. As the shoots emerge, I added more and more compost at regular intervals, about 5 centimeters at a time, until the bag was almost full. That's what I did last year. I grew early potatoes, organic potatoes, and they were called alouette. But before I planted them, I chitted them. This process causes the potato to sprout, and it means that I place those potatoes in a cool, light place in order to develop those sprouts. I read several articles about this chitting process, and some of the authors said chitting your potatoes is not necessary, but it should save you some growing time outside in the garden. In 2020, I planted Mona Lisa, another organic potato, and I think, well, perhaps they are second early. I don't know. This early or second early means that those potatoes need a less or more time to fully develop. This year I chitted these potatoes from week 11 onwards. I mentioned this number because I'm making a kitchen garden week calendar, by the way, and it helps me to make my garden plans for the coming years when I make a note of the week number when I do something. So in week 11, began chitting those potatoes. And 5 weeks later, from week 16 onwards, I planted those potatoes in bags. I planted them in compost, and I think I might have mixed it with some redundant garden soil, but I'm not sure. I forgot to make a note, and I also forgot to make a note about the feeding I used. I don't recall it. It's a pity. Instead of earthing up my potatoes as I did last year, I decided to straw them up, as I call it. I topped them up gradually, not with soil, but with straw. The first layers were very small, but during this spring, the potato plants grew very fast, so I topped it up with thicker layers. Perhaps I could have started with a thick layer anyway, but anyway, that's what I did. And from week 29 onwards, I began to harvest those potatoes. So that's after a little bit more than 90 days. That was this week. I pulled open the first bag. The bag contained 2 potatoes, seed potatoes, so I had 2 plants. And I harvested 300 grams of potatoes. And somehow I expected a lot more potatoes because, it takes an effort to straw them up every year now and then. But that's a funny thought, a silly thought, of course, because the potatoes grow in the layer where you planted them, and it's not growing upwards. It's not developing the potatoes in the straw. But that's what I realized after the first harvest. So I mentioned the harvest was 300 grams, and I was calculating that for every potato I planted, I grew 6 new potatoes. I'm not very sure if I'm happy with that. Is it enough or is it disappointing? I really don't know. Perhaps you have an idea about that. But what I do think that if next time I don't use plastic sacks, but perhaps build a so-called potato tower, I could have better yields, more potatoes in my harvest. I was reading some articles on potato towers the other day, and they consist of chicken wire, which you make a cylinder form of the chicken wire vertically. You put some soil on the bottom, plant your potatoes, and straw them up with straw. And after every layer, you plant some more potatoes and put some more soil in it. So you have you could say a potato flat. And that looks nice because it's a very suitable for people with small gardens. You don't use a lot of space, and you put the potatoes with the shoots on the outside of the cylinder of the tower where they can grow outside, and I think it looks fantastic as well. So I'll put some information on these articles and videos I was watching on potato towers, and I'll put the information in the show note of this episode on the website of Discutafel podcast, which is Discutafel.nl. Looking back at this whole procedure of strawing up potatoes instead of earthing them up like I did last year, I see a lot of advantages. The bags are very light, so you can easily move them when you need to. And I don't need that much soil. I don't know how about you, but I don't have much soil left to use for filling my containers and my growing bags, and I can easily buy some straw in the nearby shop. But I must say, and this is a uncertain point, I'm not sure about the quality of this straw when I want to garden in an eco-friendly way. It's hard to get organic straw. In my experience, it was another advantage of growing in straw that I hardly needed to water the potatoes, which was very special because we had a very hot and dry spring in this year, 2020. Apparently, the thick layers of straw functioned very well as a mulch. They kept the soil damp. It's very easy to harvest the potatoes because there's no digging involved. I just moved away the straw when harvesting, very easy. And it's also easy to, have a check on them. Just to peel back some straw and harvest the smaller new potatoes and replace the straw and allow the other potatoes to get bigger. And I reused this straw for parts in my ornamental garden or in the paths of my vegetable garden. So that's recycling. All in all, I think I've learned a lot about growing potatoes in the past 2 years. I think I can manage to get a bigger yield for next year. Perhaps I'll try this potato tower. And another experiment I'll be doing is not strawing them up that much. Perhaps I can stop earlier because the potatoes will grow anyway as long as the light is excluded. So why putting layer on layer on layer of straw when the light is excluded anyway? So this concludes my small chat about my own experiences with growing potatoes. Discu finish. So, and this concludes also this episode of Discutafel podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Perhaps you wonder how these 300 grams of potatoes tasted. Well, they tasted very nice. Do you want to share your experience with growing potatoes or even strawing up potatoes, as I call it? I would very much like to hear your reaction. Go to Discutafel.nl and find our email address there, or we could have a chat on Twitter. That would be nice. We're having a summer break as far as the English episodes are concerned, but don't worry. We've released English episodes since October 2018, so why not catch up with them this summer? I expect the next English episode to be online is from October the 8th, 2020. But first I'll be making 2 Dutch episodes. In the meantime, let's go outside, and until next time.